Hey, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Grace, Grit, and Grounds. It's exciting to be able to get back into the studio and to start recording some of the Christmas episodes. The last few weeks, it seems like I've been just chasing my tail from driving to Denver to uh, going down to Louisville last few days to attend a Baptist meeting that we had there at the state offices. And getting back into the swing of things has been sort of fun. So, again, I just want to welcome everybody back. We're going to be sort of charting a course as we move closer towards that blessed Christmas morning, as the song says. So I would encourage you guys, if you have a cup of coffee, especially on a day like today, I'm looking outside my window in my office and looking at a very gray, overcast time. And the weather app tells me we're in for some more snow. The wind has been blowing and it's been kind of a rainy, nasty day all day today. And if it does turn to snow, it's going to be a day you kind of want to just sit home and not do a whole lot. But this morning, as we sit down and gather, I encourage you to grab yourself a good cup of coffee and have a seat and let's just have a conversation. The title of this episode is about hope. And I was thinking I wanted to do something a little upbeat. I want to talk about hope, but I also recognize that there are times when that hope can feel a bit thin. And December is one of those months. Even if you have no real problem with December, you haven't really lost any loved ones, or you don't have any situation where where this particular season is a tough season, December still carries a strange tension all its own. We've talked about that a little bit in the past. The pressure to get the lights up on the house. Was talking to our worship pastor here, Josh Wilcox, and he was trying to get his house ready for the annual worship team Christmas party, and he actually apologized to this last Sunday morning to the crew. He said, "Look, I hope you're not expecting a real Christmas heavy house with all the things that are going on. All we did was use the inflatables in the front yard. We don't have a whole lot of Christmas lights up," as though that's something to apologize for. Of course, I think he was mostly just asking for a moment of levity, not so much as a moment of pity. But the reality is that there's a lot of pressure, right? We have to get those lights up, and what comes up has to come down. So you got to know that the majority of the things you put up have to come down pretty much a couple days after the seasons. The music starts to kick in everywhere. If you haven't already heard it, most of the department stores start playing Christmas music pretty early on, and then the commercials start hitting hard and heavy. But it's funny how the season tends to get a little crazy and wild. And Christmas, a time of hope and joy as we look forward to celebrating the birth of Christ, the entry of God in flesh into real time and space. We talked about that a little bit last week. During this time, and there's a lot of folks that are like this. I think probably more than we realize that hope tends to stretch a bit thin this time of year. It's almost like that blanket that you have over your legs when you're sitting on the couch in an evening, and you've got your warm cup of coffee or hot chocolate, and you're sipping it, and you're looking out your window watching the snow fall, and you realize that your toesies are getting a little cold, and you look down and you realize that the blanket you have is just not quite long enough to cover your feet, and you're like, that's frustrating, you know? And I think that's how hope is sometimes. It can feel like we're trying to stretch it out and cover more than maybe we have we have the ability to cover. And maybe that's where some of us are today. It's not really hopelessness. It's more of just being tired. It's not that our faith is running away with us. It's just a little worn. It's a little threadbare. We're not really lost. We're just sort of walking slowly into a season that, as children, promised to be more magical than not. But as we get into adulthood and start really facing all the struggles that we have, there is a bit of complexity there. And it's in that complexity that I really wanted to sort of just touch base with you guys today. I love a good cup of coffee. I love to take a moment to pause. And for me, sitting here in the studio actually is that kind of moment to pause. It lets me relax a little bit and slow down. And um, my studio, if you will, is actually in my office. And so um, it was good to get back into my office, sit in my chair, and uh, open up God's Word and spend some time just studying and preparing, as well as doing a bit of a devotional for myself. And I guess that's where I got the idea for this episode. Being back in the office, today's Wednesday, for those of you that need to know what day I'm recording. And I knew I've got a lot of stuff going on this afternoon. I have some time in the middle, and I had been working on writing this script for the past few days. And I just, I felt like I wanted to lean a little heavier into hope, because hope is a double-edged sword. It's a good and can be a sort of a bad thing. And I just want you to know this episode's not about pretending. You know that I'm a big fan of authenticity. And when we are leaning into grace, and we've talked a lot about what it means to have grit. And I think in this season, as an adult and as a parent, as a father, as a husband, grit for me is something that keeps me moving when I don't want to. And hope plays a heavy role into that. So yeah, I think this episode isn't really about pretending. It's about what hope looks like when life isn't as magical as we hoped it would be, you know, when joy isn't as loud as we would when our soul feels like whispering in the dark rather than singing in the light. Speaking of light and dark, one of my more favorite passages during the Christmas season is found in the book of Isaiah. In fact, Isaiah is just chocked full of really good verses. Not only is it just a good book all the way around, with a lot of good prophecy and good moments and good interactions between God and His people through His prophet, but Isaiah also gives us some of the most beautiful pictures of the Messiah and who Jesus was prophesied to be. And there's a passage in Isaiah chapter 9. Really, the whole chapter is kind of really neat, especially the beginning part where it talks about the people were waiting and walking in darkness, and then suddenly they've seen a great light. Just before that, it talks about the land of Naphtali and Zebulun, and sort of giving the idea of the area where Nazareth is, and how this might possibly be the place that the Messiah comes from. Of course, it was written in sort of Old Testament prophetic code, maybe, so nobody really knew. It's funny because the prophet's preaching this, and you could take that in a lot of ways. I don't think anybody realistically realized that Nazareth was going to be the place that the Messiah was going to grow up and sort of come out of. In fact, it was a joke in that time when Jesus started walking. The joke was like, can anything good come out of that area, Nazareth? And I was preaching this last Sunday that Nazareth was actually sort of a company work town. It was a tradesman's village. There probably wasn't anyone that lived there that really had more than a couple nickels, so to speak, to rub together. They were just a bunch of poor tradesmen that were not really welcome in the town that they were building. They were building the town of Sepphoris for Herod, to sort of make his dream, if you will, of being an architect like his father, and to leave a lasting mark in the world. And they needed tradesmen, and tradesmen weren't really welcome in the temple. They weren't welcome in a lot of areas in society, and so they tended to form their own little work camps. And that's kind of where Nazareth was. That's where Jesus grew up. That's where Mary was more than likely born, or at least moved to at an early age. Mary's father was more than likely a tradesman. Joseph was a tradesman. Jesus was, as far as we know, trained up and raised to be a tradesman, a carpenter. And you have to know, back in those days, carpenters didn't just mean a dude who likes to, sand and build things out of wood. Most carpenters, the word there in Greek is really just more of a craftsman. and they were more stonemasons and general contractors than, say, serious carpenters, in the same phrase that we would use today. But yeah, that's kind of where we are now as we're looking at hope, and we're looking at that darkness that nobody really wants to talk about, and it's there. I mentioned to you guys about a couple weeks ago about Alaska and how dark sometimes the winters can be, and how it sort of pushes us into a time of, I don't want to say hibernation, but we just slow down for a little bit and relax. But I do think that hope is a precious thing, and I never want to walk away from that. I do think that we should talk a little bit about what hope means, and I'm not talking about that glittery, fairy covered, sugary kind of hope. I'm not talking about that kind of hope that you would put on a greeting card and send to a friend. And I'm thinking like what real hope is, the kind that you reach for when your life is heavier than you expected, when you're not quite sure what tomorrow wants from you, when your heart is doing the best it can with what it has, but sometimes it doesn't always feel like it's quite enough. I mean, if you really get down to it, the whole birth of Christ and the entrance of hope in flesh into real space and time was all about answering that. The people that were reaching out to God in hope, they were suffering, they were struggling, they were dealing with oppression, they were dealing with a governmental body that didn't give them a lot of autonomy, and any time that they spoke out or spoke up, they were hammered down and killed. And the Jewish people, at least up to that point, had been pretty proud of their heritage, and they had fought wars to protect their identity, their national identity. And they had pushed back against the Greek speaking world. They were pushing back against the Roman occupation. And it was just a really tense time, but yet they still had to live in that world. And so that was kind of the tension Jesus was being raised in Nazareth. Was, they had that tension of not really wanting the Roman overlords, but yet working for the puppet of said Roman overlords when they were building a town that he wanted to build to honor their Roman overlords. This is a rough thing for them. I think hope is one of those strange things that, like the folks in Jesus' day, that we all want to believe in, we all need to believe in, but I don't know if anybody really knows how to fully define it. It's not quite optimism, because optimism is just putting that bright face on a on a world or circumstances that may or may not always be very optimistic on the surface. I think optimism, if we want to lean in that, optimism says, well, things will probably work out. That's not really hope, right? And I've heard it said, like, hope is not a strategy for success. So you can't just hope that things are going to work out. Hope is even more. I think hope says that even if things don't work out good, God is still going to be there, right? Hope says that when my life isn't moving the direction I want to, you can hear the voice of God speaking to us saying, "You're not alone. I'm still here with you." You know, Hope isn't a mood. It's not a vibe. And, it's not even a personality type, even though we've got people that are named Hope. And sometimes you look at them and they're just happy and bubbly, and they embody the very nature, if you will, of hope, or at least you think you do. But it's not really a personality type. And you don't hope because you have a natural inclination to be upbeat, or that you're wired necessarily for positivity. Hope is that lifeline that you cling to when you don't know what else to hold on to. It's that quiet strength, that grit, like I mentioned earlier, that pulls us forward even when everything else in our life is nudging us backwards or sideways or down a hole we don't want to go. Hope is that whisper in the dark. There it is, that dark again, that says maybe the end of a chapter, but it's not the end of the story. It's not the end of your story or my story with you, the Holy Spirit would be whispering to you. Hope looks different on the season that we're going through. Sometimes hope feels like courage. that gritty sort of courage to move forward. Sometimes hope is more stubborn. It just won't be moved. It's like, I'm gonna stay here. I ain't going nowhere. Um, Sometimes hope feels like a shaky breath that we draw as we take a moment to just stop what we're doing because we're moving too fast in a direction we don't think we want to go. It's that sometimes that shaky breath that you take when you're not sure what's coming next, but you're willing to pause and then maybe take that next step no matter what. And I think that counts. I think God dwells in those moments, and it's almost like a breath prayer that we don't utter because we're afraid to. And there are times when we think that God is not fully with us because we can't always feel Him, and we get that feeling. Um, and that's the thing about hope and love and grace. We don't always feel them, but doesn't mean they're not there. Um, Hope's not really a feeling. Hope's like love, like grace. It's a muscle that we exercise and it grows. The stronger our faith, the more powerful grace is in our life. It's like that sort of that spiritual muscle that we exercise. And sometimes it's a steady, slow growth. Sometimes you're doing through with like resistance training where you're pushing your way through it. But the reality is that it's growing. Because the older we get, the more responsibility we have in our life, the heavier things are. And it's at those times that hope and grace and mercy tends to play out more in our life. And this is when it really gets beautiful, even though it's frustrating. And that's the thing about hope. It can be beautiful and frustrating at the same time as it grows in these seasons of, I don't know, maybe sadness or drought or frustration. It's definitely seasons we wouldn't choose for ourselves, but this is when hope really reigns supreme if we'll let it. Um, Hope doesn't need the ideal conditions to grow in. It just needs an obedience and a willingness to be present with God. Um, I think sometimes that hope grows within the cracks of our story, you know, when it doesn't seem like things are going to be beautiful and lovely and it just seems like things are just a bit too broken. I think that's when hope sort of springs up. One of my favorite movies of all time is a movie by the name of Joe versus the Volcano. If you haven't watched it, I encourage you to watch it at least 3 times. It is really a great movie. It is one of the first movies that Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks star in, and I realized I'm probably dating myself at this point because this is an older movie, and I'm an older person, so I tend to lean back in the movies that I enjoyed the most growing up, and this movie moved me on so many levels. I try to make it a point to watch it at least once a year, if not twice. I keep it permanently downloaded on my phone so that when I'm traveling on planes or whatever, I can just pop it on. It's really a neat movie, and there's a scene right in the beginning where the main character Tom Hanks is walking into a job he hates, and he's pretty hopeless, and he's just received news that he's dying, and I know it seems like a story about hope, and you're talking about Tom Hanks playing a character who just learned that he has a death sentence that's hanging over him, and suddenly he starts noticing all the little things, and as he's walking up to this horrible job that he has, there's a sidewalk, and there's this little flower that's growing up through the crack in the sidewalk, and it's been stepped on and beaten down, and he just sort of kneels down and sort of props it up, and that sort of sets the tone for the rest of the movie, and it lays out this idea of hope, and even in the midst of the concrete chaos of his existence, there's still a little bit of life, there's still a little bit of hope, and there's still a little bit of beauty. And that's kind of encapsulates my thoughts on that process. It's relational. It's something that grows within us, but it can't grow only in us, right? It isn't something that we just sort of drum up inside ourselves and use it as like internal motivation to move forward. It's something bigger than that. It comes from someone that's bigger, greater, and stronger. And that's really what the Christmas story is all about, is God telling his people that he is still there, and he's there in such a more powerful way than they can possibly understand. When God sent Jesus to be born of a woman and to live a sinless life, and to live a life amongst humanity, to be able to show himself to his people. That was hope embodied. That was God saying that I understand that sometimes hope can seem hard and hard to understand and just slightly out of reach. That's why he sent his son, to be that light in the dark. Um, One of the best passages in the New Testament is the preamble, we call it, in theological circles in the book of John. It's in the beginning was the Word was God, the Word, came down and dwelt among us and became flesh, and we beheld his glory. There was, he was the light in the darkness, and those that liked the darkness, they clung to it and they ran from the light. There's a lot of that in John's gospel, as he loves to write in that kind of study of contrast between light and dark, life and death. You see that all throughout his gospel. And I think that's where hope is for us. When your hope is tied to the circumstances in your life, that's where it's going to fall apart. That's where it's not going to be good. But when your hope is tied to Christ, it becomes a level of quiet steadfastness that never lets go. It's an anchor that will hold against the storm, to quote the song. It doesn't have to be loud. It's not flashy. It's not covered in tinsel or Christmas lights. And it doesn't always feel like it's perfect, but it is. And it's real. It's tangible. Hope it isn't confidence in ourselves even. It's confidence in his character. It's saying that no matter what, I know, Lord, you've always been there for me. You've always helped me in time past. I'm leaning through faith on the past goodness of your character, and I'm going to press forward even when I don't want to. Um, that's just the nature of what hope is. What does hope sound like? You ever thought about that? What does hope sound like? Everything has a sound, right? What does hope sound like? I think sometimes hope sounds like, well, today was rough, but in it all, God is still good. When we ask the question, I don't know what he's doing, but I know he's not done yet, and he's actively working in my life. When we say things like, I can't fix this, but I trust that he will be with me even in my brokenness. And that's the other thing. Like, a lot of times we bring our broken, messed up lives begging for a quick fix or an easy fix to God. And the reality is we've kind of messed it up so much that there is no quick fix. And maybe there is no ever fix. But it doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. Doesn't mean he's not going to be there with us. It doesn't mean that he's not going to cause the hope to spring up in the cracks of the mess of the life that we have. But it does mean that we can trust and hope in him. Sometimes hope is no more spiritual than just showing up. Sometimes just trying again. Sometimes reaching out to that person that needs to be reached out to. Sometimes hope is nothing more simple than just refusing to believe the lie that the enemy is telling us. The idea that our best days are behind us and that our future is really going to suck. That's sort of the gift of what hope gives us. Hope isn't loud. Sometimes it just sneaks in like the sunrise on a slow morning. Comes in a little slow and I don't know, a little tentative. And then suddenly you realize that another day has dawned. Yeah, hope does sometimes feel thin. For my family, Christmas it's a mixed blessing. I have grandkids. I have wonderful kids. I have great friends and individuals that I look forward to spending time with. But there's always that that tinge of sadness of the loss that I felt, um, in this season. And I think that's where the thinness of hope for me really kind of plays out. I don't always see the full picture. We all face struggles during this season. And I think that no matter what our struggles are, God is not intimidated by those. Hope in Scripture is never described as something that we create, it's something we lean into, it's something that God brings, it's something that arrives as a gift from the Holy Spirit, something that sometimes finds us when we're too tired to go on searching. That's why I really enjoy this Christmas season. You know, um, that first Christmas, and I've talked about it a lot. I get kind of frustrated when people start um, talking about the myths surrounding the Christmas story. And I recently had a Bible study on our Wednesday night gathering where I sort of debunked some of the traditional stories, like for instance that Joseph and Mary were walking through the dark on that final Christmas day, and she was riding on the back of a donkey, and the light of the star was shining above them as they're wandering through the desert, and they show up in the middle of the night, and there's an innkeeper. And he feels sad, and all the other inns are full, and he doesn't know what to do, and he kind of wants to help the couple, but his wife is a little bit of a harpy and sort of an evil woman, and she's firm and adamant there's no room, and the innkeeper just looks sad and says, I don't have any room. But as they're walking away, he hustles out of his busy and filled inn and says, oh, but I have a barn, please, you can come stay here. um that's first of all, it's not biblical. um uh just so you know, there, and I don't care what anybody says, there was no inn in Bethlehem. Bethlehem was a tiny little village that did not have the resources or the population or the people coming through to support a hotel, motel, inn construct. It's not the word that Luke uses in his gospel. It's a completely different word. It's the word katalima, which means spare room everywhere else. And it never says in the Gospel of Luke that they showed up last minute just as the water was breaking and her body was about to basically give birth. In fact, just says just the opposite. It says while they were there, the time came. So they're already there. It was a present tense there. And while they were there, they gave birth. And, without a doubt, Mary gave birth among friends and family. And the men were kicked out of the house, and the women were gathered around her. She wasn't alone. She wasn't struggling as a young teenage mother to give birth all by herself in a time of sadness and darkness. I don't even know if Jesus was born at night, for crying out loud. Scripture doesn't tell us that. I think that says more about us than it does about the birth of Christ. But I can tell you this: it wasn't shiny. It wasn't a Hallmark moment. There was no little drummer boy that shows up. I'm fairly positive, though, that there was evening that happened because, after the birth took place, and however long, we don't know exactly how much time passed between when Jesus made his entrance into flesh and blood outside of the womb, then was wrapped in the swaddling clothes, and then laid in the feed trough, which would have been inside a house where the animals were kept, um, and then when the shepherds came. But I can tell you this: shepherds, they were still the lowest rung of society in that day and age. They were people of the earth. They were not welcome in the temple, and they were not looked upon very highly. Even though David, the greatest king of Israel, was a shepherd king. Still, they just didn't look very highly on them. But even in their lowly status, those shepherds that came and saw the baby would never have left Mary and Joseph if they didn't have a place to stay, if the baby wasn't being cared for, because hospitality in that culture was like the hallmark of who they were. And there's no way that those shepherds would leave the presence of Jesus and Mary, even if it wasn't the Messiah, just a newly birthed child, and the young mother and young father. There's no way they would have left them in a state where they weren't being as comfortable and cared for. If they weren't in a house surrounded by family and friends, they would have said, please come home to our house. We will take care of you. So you got to know that's part of the story. But even that is just an essence of what hope is. Joy to the world today, this day, in a city of Bethlehem, born unto you a Savior. Hope made manifest. The Messiah has come. The beauty of the Christmas story is right there in the middle of their mess, in the middle of their world. That long night has passed, and suddenly the light of the Messiah is shining on them. This is what hope is all about. There are three truths, I think, in this holiday season that we can lean into when it talks about hope, and when it sort of feels thin, that I think we can pull from the story of the birth of the Messiah, the birth of Jesus. And that is that thin hope, hey, guess what? It's still hope. It's still hope, even when it seems to be threadbare and thin. You don't need a roaring fire. Sometimes just a spark or an ember of hope is all you need to keep going. Number two, you don't create hope, you receive it. Hope is a gift that was given to us, just like Jesus was a gift that was given to humanity. God so loved the world that he gave the gift, if you will, of himself through his son to the whole world. You don't have to force it into your life. You just have to make space for it. Number three, light comes into the darkness, our darkness. We don't have to crawl or climb into the light or out of the dark before God meets us, because he steps into our life with that light, with that hope, ready to draw us forward. I think about the fragility of my understanding of God's universe and his world, and I think about those mountains. I'm often reminded that God's light and his love and his mercy, it's not a fragile thing. It's not delicate. It's rugged. It's made for dealing with the kind of life that we have to live. And even though sometimes the sun may feel far away, and it may feel a bit dark, the beautiful thing is that, the daylight always comes back. The nights, like they were in Alaska, may be long, but they're never permanent. I didn't live in the part of Alaska that the sun set, in like September and didn't come back again till March. That happened for some people, not for us. And even in the coldest times, there's always that sense of new life waiting to emerge when the cold starts to recede. My advice and thought to you guys is this, is that when I think back on our time in Alaska, and I think about the recent trip that I had with my daughter in Denver, and I think of the beauty of the mountains and the rugged nature of that terrain, I'm reminded of the 4 active volcanoes that I used to be able to see with my naked eye, from Mount Augustine to Mount Iliamna, Mount Redoubt, Mount Spur. And when I could look up and see those mountains every day, it reminded me that hope, the hope that God gives us, is not fragile. It's a rugged, constant thing that I can set my anchor on and hold steady with. That's what I love about the hope that God gives us. So as we come to the end of this episode, I kind of want to give you guys I don't want to give you homework, but give you something you can do to help connect to the hope that God has for you. The first thing is, and my mother used to say this when I was a kid, is name the game, don't play the game. And so I think putting a name on something helps. So I would encourage you, if you're feeling a bit thin and worn out, name at least one place in your life where hope feels a bit thin. Just admit it. Admit it to God out loud, admit it to yourself. Yeah, admit it honestly. Be honest with God, be honest with yourself. And after you name that place, pair that up with one small mercy that you feel every day. There's always at least one mercy you can cling to, one piece of grace, one moment of in your day or your week that God is definitely showing up and present. Because I think hope grows where we give attention. And the more attention or more light, more that we shine onto that moment of hope, the greater it's going to be and grow in our life. And finally, once you've named it, once you've noticed a small piece of mercy that God has given you each day, let God carry what you're tired of holding, what you're struggling to keep, Just give it to him. I think hope expands in our life when we stop trying to manufacture it and just lean on the hope that God gives us. So if hope feels small in your hands, I want you to know it's okay. Hope doesn't have to be big to be real. It doesn't have to be loud to be powerful, and it doesn't have to be certain to be sacred. It simply has to be offered, held, and carried one day at a time. Really, the message that I have for this season as we move more into this Christmas time period, if something I've said today resonates with you, if hope is something that you'd like to know more about, I encourage you to drop a comment and a message of what helps you to cling to hope. Maybe an area that you're struggling with hope, but maybe you could use some thoughts and prayers. That's kind of what the comment section's for. I always encourage people to like and subscribe to this channel. It gives me an opportunity to share this to other people and to spread the word. So we're kind of at your mercy. So like and subscribe and maybe share it with a friend. The thing is, this month, December, it doesn't always come wrapped in joy. And if you're walking kind of slow through the beginning part of this season, um, and you're just really struggling, um, because you think that the season looks a little more heavy than it does bright and happy, I think you're the exact person that Isaiah was talking to when he said um, that out of the darkness they beheld a great light. That light is Jesus. He's the light of the world. We know that. And we know there are people that are walking in darkness. And if you're one of those, I encourage you, reach out to me, direct private message me through YouTube, connect with your local church, reach out to a pastor or a friend that has a kind of faith that you wish you did, and ask them what makes them different. Um, the people walking in darkness are not always the people who feel victorious, and I understand that. But those are the people that God wants to reach out to the most. None of us have perfect families or perfect lives or perfect finances. For the most part, we're just trying to keep moving forward. I think these are the people we talk about that need to see that great light, the light that has been shining since the dawn of time, but got a bit brighter on that early morning, that first Christmas when Jesus entered into the world. One of the things that I've been pretty consistent in saying, grace builds what grit sustains. And hope, even thin hope, is still hope. And it can carry you farther than you think. So until next week, keep the coffee warm, conversation flowing, and keep a hold of the hope that lies within you.